to another episode of Forging Ahead with Anvil. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Patrick Sells. He is the Chief Innovation Officer at Quontic Bank and actually the Digital Banker of the Year winner through American Banker. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here talking with you today.
Glad to have you on board. So to start, I always like starting with your background and a little bit of Quontic Bank. Just talk a little bit about your company.
Sure. So my background, I would start a digital agency of sorts when I was in college and would do that for about 8 years. And what we largely did was we helped companies figure out how to launch new products or services online. And really had the blessing of being able to work in just about every industry but banking. And I couldn't figure out why that was. And then about 2 years ago, right around 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to come join Quontic and kind of make a big pivot in my career and try to help a bank figure out how to be a digital bank. And Quontic had gotten in some trouble with the regulators, and going digital was a strategy in which we could solve that. And so that was kind of the catalyst for joining. Quontic's background, we've been around for about 10 years now. We are a CDFI, or a Community Development Financial Institution. And so we focus on lending to low to moderate income. We primarily do that in the form of mortgages nationwide. And then we are a digital bank. And so, we are in all 50 states, and I've spent the last 2 years kind of transforming Quontic from a community bank into a digital bank, if you will.
Got it. No, totally. That's pretty awesome to hear. I mean, I know early on in our conversation when we started first chatting, you mentioned a couple of things that Quontic does differently than other community banks. Would love to hear a handful of those stories. I know you mentioned your values are really important to you, and then kind of the box that you give your new hires at the beginning when they join. I would love to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, so for us, it does start with our culture and really our mission statement. So our mission is to break the system for financial empowerment, and that's the most provocative bank mission statement out there today. And underlying that is this recognition that the financial system is set up with one size fits all products and really one size fits all cultures. And that means we need to do it differently. And so we want to do it differently in every way. But it's not just to be different or to be innovative, if you will. It's for financial empowerment. And we take that for both our customers and for the team here at Quontic. So it's really kind of two lenses, if you will. And so with that as the mission, we then say, okay, well, how are we going to go do this? How are we going to know that we're able to break the system for financial empowerment? Yeah. And we created our three strategic anchors. We think these are the three most important questions that everyone at the bank needs to know and be able to answer yes to if we're going to do something. And so the first one is innovative deposits. What we want to do is build and launch checking accounts that uniquely align with the consumer's most avid passion. And this is really one that's taken us about 2 years to get to, and you'll see it really start to come to life in January. And it's very unique in how we've done it. The other one is adaptive lending. We want to lend where other banks won't. And that's where, being a CDFI really comes in, and our focus on providing mortgages to gig economy, low income, self-employed individuals. And then the third one is maximum leverage. And this speaks to how we do things. We think we can get the most leverage as a bank through two things. Technology, as we've talked about, and we want to be very focused on being a technology first bank. And then more importantly, though, is for the people. And so we have kind of a mandate. We talk about human flourishing. We think if we can be a workplace that fosters human flourishing, that will give us the maximum leverage. And so those are kind of the three strategic anchors that we try to do everything through, and we have a little bit of fun along the way. To your point, new hires at Quontic, you get a box with a bunch of swag in it. And on the side of the box is a quote from our CEO that says, in essence, let's have fun and break some shit, and for the empowerment of our customers. And so it kind of speaks to a little bit of the, maybe the attitude, if you will, the ethos of Quontic.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, a lot of people would agree today that the system's broken, right? And to your point about serving the underserved, I think that belief is probably pretty common. they've traditionally been ignored or not served by by banks. So I would love to delve into that a little bit more. How did you identify this as the customer group or customer segment that you wanted to go after? Why is this important beyond just being a CDFI? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. You know, it's a little bit about my kind of personal approach. And I feel like there's so much I don't know until I get started into something, and I'm not going to try to map everything out, if you will. And so, how we ended up here, I can't say was necessarily by design, but I
Yeah.
think as we got deeper and deeper into, in particular, being a CDFI and just looking at the world around us, and I think it helped probably coming from outside the industry. Just
Hmm.
realize, to your point, there's a lot of people who are underbanked, and I think 2020 really revealed that to the country through the PPP program. Right,
Yeah.
all of a sudden we realized that a huge amount of the population doesn't have a relationship with the bank.
Hmm.
It's with the fintech. We see that in the CDFIs, and I think we also even see it right in what we know, that the gap where the rich get richer is happening, right? And so despite living in this age of, I think, probably the greatest technological innovation in the financial system, what we're seeing is it's largely going towards a certain demographic, and it's even farther, I think, isolating and creating this chasm in America. And so we want to say, look, if you are underbanked or the underdog, we want to get to know you, we want to know your story, and we're going to play a very different role as a bank.
Hmm.
And it's very rewarding to do
Yeah.
that, right? It's not just about assets and liabilities. What we do actually makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely on the one hand, there's the giving back to your community that you're doing. I feel like that's really apparent in especially working with these underbanked people. But do you? I mean, we live in a capitalist society. Do you think that this is a market opportunity, that banks have just been ignoring this market opportunity to not only do well by serving these people, but also, maybe create a new line of business? Is that something that you've viewed it as, or yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things most proud about in 2020, if you will, over the last 2 years, we've been able to increase the average pay at Quontic by over 25%. We've
Hmm.
doubled the 401k. We've rolled out 3 months parental leave, which very few banks offer any type of parental leave. And
Yeah.
I point to that because I do think that part of who's underserved are employees at banks. I think the what we have is a lot of bank boards and bank executives that tend to make a lot of money. But if you look at the average pay of a bank employee compared to outside the industry, it's
Hmm.
behind, right? And that's crazy. But
Yeah.
then also for the customers, right? And so we've served more low income families and underbanked people this year. And despite all these increases, let's say in benefits, et cetera, we are going to exceed what our budget was. And
Hmm.
so I do very much think you can do good and make money and make good money at it. And I do think it's, something that's people write off. And look, it's not easy. And I
Yeah.
think that's maybe part of it is I know I know that it's a square and I can check the box every time. But the problem is the number of those squares are getting smaller and smaller, and all the circles, if you will, are getting bigger. But yeah, that means you're going to have to do some real work. You're going to have to make a little bit of a mess. You're going to make some mistakes, but you're going to figure it out. You can make money, and you can make a real difference in this country and in the lives of the people we serve.
Yeah. So, can you give me an example of a product that you guys probably have created or you provide to these underserved
Yeah.
banking communities? I would love to hear an actual product. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the ways from the mortgage standpoint, so Quantic is located, headquartered in New York City.
Hmm.
And we have in Flushing, New York, we have a loan production office, and Flushing has a very high Asian American community. And one of the things that we know in that community is that when someone buys a home, it's much more of a community purchase, if you will. There's
Hmm.
extended family members and others who are going in to help make this happen. Well, the problem is if you go to a house in Flushing, is $1 million for a one-bedroom house. And so if you go to your traditional bank, that you likely won't be able to qualify for a mortgage. And that bank's not going to take a risk on you by saying, well, I can't sell your mortgage to Fannie and Freddie, so I don't want to own it on my balance sheet. And so you're left out. And what we'll say is, look, you can take all that into consideration. We
Hmm.
don't think that your income necessarily should be the determining factor if you have the ability to service that loan.
Right.
And one of the things we know is if you have good equity in that home, you're not going to let it go. You're not going to sign up for something you can't afford, right? So our average equity in Flushing is actually 40% at time of purchase,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know that person and that family is not going to let that, they're not going to sign up for a mortgage they can't afford. But again, you got to look at this very differently. And so like in the immigrant population, it's more than just, the Asian American community, but the immigrant population is an example where we're much more willing to work with families, extended families, and communities to
Yeah.
help make the purchase of a home possible.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a lot of the work that community banks often talk about, um, the work that they do and why they're important. And this is a great example of that, right? You are embedded in that community, and it's your prerogative to understand the cultural differences towards money, how people approach money, and use those in your calculations
Yeah.
in serving these customers.
Yeah.
That's something that, frankly, J.P. Morgan Chase is not going to do, right? Like,
Right.
they're a big bank.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, you know, in particular, winning American Banker was kind enough to honor me with the Digital Banker of the Year award, which I think caught a lot in the industry by surprise, given my age and Quontic size and experience. But
Hmm.
I think, and I've been able to have lots of conversations with other community banks, and they all seem to really be grappling with like, I'm a community bank or I'm a digital bank, right? And it creates a lot of anxiety in the system, if you will. And
Yeah.
look at it and go, what the heck? Like, yes, I'm a community bank, but technology is abundant everywhere. And so my community no longer is defined by my geography, right?
Hmm.
I can really think about the communities I serve, regardless of the geography. And that changes the game. And so there's, I think, just this incredible explosive potential as banks start to realize and think differently and really get some of these old mindsets out. Um,
Hmm.
and that's where I think and that's where I'm very excited for the industry of community banking.
Yeah.
But there's some work to be done to get there.
I like that you mentioned that, because in a lot of ways I feel like this idea of globalization of your community being more than just like the immediate 5 miles where you live in is a very
Yeah.
millennial Gen Z kind of belief. We all grew up with the ability to reach across the world,
Right.
to people on the other side of the planet, to talk to them and interact with them. Um,
Yeah.
and community is defined differently for us, honestly. Yeah, I do think that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at our lives. We have friends we've made in college or other areas, and we don't have to give those up just because we don't geographically live next to each other,
Right.
right? And so we get the opportunity to define community, I think, differently than maybe previous generations had.
Hmm. Do you think that this is an area of contention with previous generations? I guess the today the stereotype, let's put it that way, of the person running a bank is not a 20 something, 30
Right.
something millennial. It's a older person who's been in the industry for many years. And do you think that a lot of the friction in terms of how we as young adults, or adults now, I guess we're not really young adults. I like to think I'm young,
Yeah.
but as true adults now, how we think about how things should be done versus how it used to be done, simply because the times have changed or technology has changed. Do you think
Yeah.
that's the cause of the friction?
I think so. I mean, I think it'd be hard to pinpoint to any one thing. I do think, though, what we know that's true outside of the industry, so
Mm-hmm.
generically true, is that people don't like change. We know that people in power really don't like change, right?
Yeah,
And, we know people who are comfortably in power hate change,
yeah.
right? And at the end of the day, one of the most powerful private entities you can own or be in charge of is a bank, right? The
Mm-hmm.
banking system is core to the United States economy, our country. And so there's many bankers who, not out of malicious intent, I think, is just kind of human nature. Many times they're multi generations of family ownership. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're comfortably in charge and in a powerful position. And so why that's just really hard to change. I think some are changing and want to. And so again,
Mm-hmm.
I don't fault them against it. But I think what you then have in our generation is a truly fundamentally different wiring towards how we see our lives and the impact of our lives and the kinds of companies we want to go work at. I think the greatest existential threat facing community banking is culture,
Mm-hmm.
because we lost the war on talent. So in the last decade, our generation didn't graduate and say, I want to go work at a community bank, right?
Yeah.
And so the first digitally native generation doesn't work inside of community banks because what's it's lost it doesn't feel genuine anymore.
Right.
You're saying you really care about the community and you want to do all these things, but yet I look at so much of it and it doesn't ring true. And meanwhile, there's restaurants that feel more meaningful, about farm to table than many community banks. So
Mm-hmm.
if that doesn't change, I think it faces a big crisis. I do tend to think, though, people are capitalistic in this society and there's a strong incentive to figure out how to change. It
Mm-hmm.
just may not look the same 10 years from now as it does today.
Yeah, I like that analogy you made with restaurants. It's like, what are the pillars of a community nowadays, right? Like, looking back 100 years, let's say maybe the pillar of a community is the church, the
Right.
local church in your local region. Then it was maybe your community group, your PTA or whatever. And nowadays, in a lot of ways, especially for me and you both living in cities, um, our community center is the restaurant that we go to
Right.
every week, and where our friends are, or the bar, or it's work in a lot of ways. I think you have that community of friends and coworkers that it's a little
Yeah.
bit more mixed. And
Yeah.
yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
you said that, and you uh, rang deeply true with me. I think, before coming into the industry, I was in, startup world, and well, maybe the average age skewed younger than it does today at Quontic. It probably wasn't by that much, but you felt much more like friends and family, like we were doing this
Mm-hmm.
together,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's very powerful. And I don't think many of the banks that I've experienced and gotten to interact with, you have that same feeling, right? And I do think that's something our generation looks for,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't see it inside community banking,
Yeah, we're looking for something that's like more than just a job, right?
right?
I know I've worked in a lot of small companies in my career, and even some larger ones, and I've definitely gravitated towards the companies where you felt like clocking in. There was no such thing as clocking in, honestly.
Right.
Like you worked a lot, that's for sure, but at the same time, you were that was what you wanted to do in a lot of ways.
Right.
So I've enjoyed that. Um, One thing I do want to touch on is definitely how you approach adopting new technologies and how you think banks should be thinking about new technology within the banking space. I mean, like you mentioned, technology is pervasive; it's everywhere. Everybody uses it. Um,
Right.
but how does this apply to banking?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges you have in banking is that you can't. It's not set up to innovate, right? So many of the fintechs and the technology companies want you to sign these really long contracts, and the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is you don't know exactly what you need to do. You just know right now you need to innovate, and so you're kind of disincentivized, right? And you're paralyzed by this desire for perfection, and so
Mm-hmm.
you can't quickly try things on and figure out how to do it differently. One of the ways we've tried to kind of mitigate that is we'll usually offer premium terms up front with the ability to break a contract, as opposed to trying to get the price lower to kind of de-risk it, if you will. That was kind of a learning lesson. About a year into it, we made a pretty big shift there. And then I think one of the other big challenges is banks haven't needed to have developers in house. So,
Yeah.
we got all of our technology from our core providers, and basically it was good. It worked. And what we just needed were IT teams to make sure that everything functioned the right way. Well, now we come and find ourselves today where there's code being written everywhere, and there's no innate ability to understand it or to understand how integrations work or APIs work. And that's, I think, if you're going to want to do anything in technology, I would tell a bank before you go, pick a fintech, hire a developer. You got to
Mm-hmm.
get that in-house knowledge going. It'll make everything so much easier.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions on how a bank should go and evaluate these developers? I think, I think the corollary to that is, we're a technology company, but we aren't a marketing sales company. So like hiring that first person can be hard when you don't have the perspective or the knowledge of what you're actually hiring for. So what would be the advice you would give a bank when evaluating a developer?
Yeah, great question. And I'll be honest, I don't really know because there's not a whole lot of case studies or data points here, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
look at. I think one way you could, probably the safest way, is by poaching someone from a fintech, right?
Mm-hmm.
They probably will have some understanding of regulations and compliance and what it's like working with a bank. And that's probably going to give you your safest bet. I think it'd be pretty tough to go get a developer outside the industry if you don't have the ability to really know how to manage them or interview them, or right. I also think it's a great opportunity, though, to lease or rent talent, if you will. Right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
great companies out there. You can say, look, and this is how we started. We were hiring about 2 developers full time, but it was through a software consulting company. Today we have an in-house development team, but we had to kind of figure out a way to get there. We wanted to kind of do it in a de-risked way, and so
Yeah.
I think there's another path for banks to consider in that route.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I think for even at technology companies, we do internships, and that's the reason for internships. It's essentially a 3 month interview where you really get to know how this
Yeah.
person works, how they think, and if they're the right fit for your company. Um, that's cool. I think another thing that I want to touch on the technology side is I know you shared with me some of the values that Quantic has, and I feel like a few of them really resonate with myself, having worked in technology. I feel a few of them are towing the line a little bit with everybody loves to hate on the phrase "move fast and break things," and I think a lot of the meaning of that phrase has been lost, especially as has been publicized. But I know one of your values is try it on, and the
Yeah.
other one is progress, not perfection. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about those and how that applies to banking?
Yeah, so can't help but just first comment that so many companies don't have core values. They have permission to play values
Yeah.
like integrity and teamwork, hard work. Like no shit, if you don't have those, you're not going to work here or anywhere. That's not core. That's not unique to you, right?
Hmm.
And so that's my little soapbox for the day. But yeah, we have 4 core values, and you hear these every day in almost every conversation. The first one is progress, not perfection. And this
Hmm.
really speaks to the mindset that we want to have, and that the destination is not perfection. The destination is to be in a constant state of progress. And so we don't want to be paralyzed by fear of wondering, is this perfection, or afraid to act because we're afraid of failing. Just like if perfection can't exist, failure can't exist, right? So
Hmm.
we just want to say, how do we constantly be oriented towards making progress? But that's not because we don't care about what the outcome is. No, the goal is actually another one of our core values. We want to be very intentional about, do we know why we're doing what we're doing? Everyone at Quantic has their 2 or 3 KPIs. They know how to be measured. When meetings start, we say, everyone go around, what's the goal of this meeting? Are we all
Yeah.
aligned? Did everyone even know? Right? So we want to be very intentional about and disciplined about that. The third one is try it on, right? This is, we want to be quick to try new things on. Kind of the analogy we use is, if you're at a department store and you see a shirt you like, you're not going to stop for 20 minutes to make a pro con list, right? You're going to put it on and go, I
Yeah.
like the fabric, but not the fit, or I don't like the fabric or the fit, right? And there's just kind of, you're not mad at yourself for grabbing a shirt that you didn't end up liking, right? So we want to be quick to try things on, but also to recognize that what stifles innovation and progress is people are afraid to speak up, because what if it's a bad idea? What if
Hmm.
someone challenges it or doesn't like it? So you kind of have a hall pass because you say, try it on, try this on with me, and then you throw out the idea, right?
Yeah.
And the fourth one, so we want to progress, not perfection, know the goal, try it on. And those things kind of create like a compounding interest factor, if you will, of innovation and progress inside the bank.
That's bank speak for everybody out there.
Yeah,
Compounding interest.
exactly. Einstein says the most powerful force in the world. And then, but the last one is say cheese, right? And we want to be a place that's fun. We work together all day, and kind of the visual we give people is, next time someone comes up to you to take a picture and they say cheese, pause
Hmm.
for a second and notice what happens. You smile, and the photographer smiles. So how can we recreate that type of example inside the bank with each other, our employees, and have a lot of fun along the way? And because work's going to be stressful, especially if you're
Yeah.
innovating and changing, but that doesn't mean we can't have fun.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like these actually really resonated with me as well. We have a value at Anvil which is called seek pursuits, and the explanation for this one's kind of funny. We always use like a sports analogy where, you know, there's goals, where if, like, let's say you're playing soccer and you score a goal, that's like winning the battle. If you win the league, that's winning the war. But
Mm.
seeking pursuits is actually the daily practice. It's the things you do every day to move you towards your outcome that you're hoping to achieve. And be candid with yourself, like, we may never achieve those outcomes, but as long as we're making progress towards those outcomes,
Yeah,
that's the value right there.
absolutely. And
um,
I think that's a very enriching life, right? If you
yeah,
can, we know this again, no one ever set a goal of making $10 million. And because they made it, they found themselves happy, right?
yeah,
So what matters though is how you live and how you spend your day and how you talk to yourself. And that's really what's enjoyable. It's the pursuit, to your point. It's not the accomplishment, right?
yep. I feel like we're getting very, very deeply into this conversation now. Let's pivot a bit into something a little bit more controversial, so just to make it fun.
Good.
I know there was a piece, or Gary Cohn had said something about community banks, and there was a huge outrage within community banking. So I would love for you to kind of like talk about Gary Cohn's position, and then talk about how kind of your rebuttal to that, like how you feel where he's right or wrong.
Yeah, so look, I think Cohen, very, very smart guy and successful guy, and has the ability to synthesize a lot of information and, intuitively make a lot of decisions. And so, at one level, when that came out, I think it riled up a lot of community bankers. They felt like it was a slap in the face, or how dare you. Um, and I kind of took a slightly different position, if you will, in that at the core of what I, wrote an article on was very much less about agreeing or disagreeing with Gary, and more
Mm-hmm.
about saying, look, I see these common assumptions about the industry. And what if those were seen differently? And that to me is actually the heart of innovation. It's not bringing something new into the mix. It's saying, what are those deeply held underlying assumptions that if all of a sudden changed, how would everything else change as a result of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I tried to lay out a case for was, community banks can be innovative. We're actually, if you look at the rise of the fintechs in the country, the majority of them were powered by small community banks. Why? It was easy for them to figure out how to wrap their heads around it. It wasn't Chase and BOA, right?
Yeah.
Community banks can play a vibrant and meaningful role in your communities. Like I shared about how we do our lending. There's many other banks that are doing that, but we have to choose to see it that way. Banking can be fun, like the culture, what we were just talking about. You can actually do this and have fun. But if you hold those commonly held assumptions, then, perhaps you end up in as bleak of an assessment that Gary, commented on. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way of doing this where you say, if those were seen differently, where do you end up? Do you end up in the same bleak outcome, or do you end up in a very exciting outcome? I think you end up in a very exciting outcome, and I want to help bring that narrative to the country and make it true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to think about it. Maybe it was less of a slap in the face and more of a could be viewed as more of a wake up call. Like, hey, maybe some of these assumptions need to be challenged,
Right.
and figure
But
out the new way to do things.
since you wanted to be a little bit controversial, I mean, I do. It is very much reflective of the political cultural age we're living in. Someone makes a
Hmm.
statement, and you immediately go, "I agree" or "I hate it."
Yeah.
Right? And there's not. We've seemed to have lost as a culture in some ways the art of thinking,
Yeah.
reflecting. Right? So I wanted to at first kind of react to Gary's comments, but then it wasn't about that, right? I said, okay, I don't know what assumptions underlie that, but my guess is there has to be something. And I've also heard these other assumptions, and I want to try to have a conversation, not a fight, right?
Hmm.
And, this visceral reaction that we've all gotten conditioned to, I think is very detrimental to society, culture, progress, coming together as Americans and people.
Banking.
Yeah, banking, exactly.
We're back on topic. Yeah, no, but
Exactly.
totally, I get it. I feel the same way. I feel like it's been a roller coaster ride for 2020 for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think we're just about up on time. I feel like that the time flew by, and I really appreciate your insight, your thoughtfulness, and your again, congratulations on winning Digital Banker of the Year. That's got to be a pretty cool thing, especially I mean, you're what? How many years into banking at this
Yeah.
point?
Just crossed 2 years into it. So
That's pretty awesome.
yeah.
Well, congrats again. Thanks again for being on our show. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to having many more conversations with you.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you.